Temporary, it's from this worldly sand, dust, and it's going to go back to the dust. Similarly, with our body, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He put the soul in our body. This soul is heavenly, or the spirit is heavenly, and it comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And also number 3 is we have our minds. So it's very important that all of these, they work in compliance, or they work accordingly and together. So for example, if a person has an issue with their body, meaning they have a sickness, then what happens? It has an effect on their mental. It has an effect on their mental side. Right? It mentally affects that person. That what's going to happen to me now. Like for example, now you have this disease or this virus. So people have this fear. So it has an effect on the body too. That if a person has light flu or light fever, then what happens? He feels like, now I have this virus too. And it has an effect on a person's mind. That what's going to happen to me now? Am I going to die? Am I going to end up in the hospital? What's going to happen? Do I have this disease? Do I have this virus? So it's very important. That's why in Islam teaches us to focus on all these things. On a person's mental health, on a person's physical health, and a person's spiritual health. And our spiritual health is in a masjid, is by reading Quran, the teaching of the Prophet ﷺ. Our physical health, and Islam pays big importance or huge importance to a person's mental health. That's why if you look at the history of Europe, the first mental hospitals, as you say, were opened by Muslim doctors. If you go and read the history in Spain, in Andalus, this first hospital, so they realized and they recognized the importance of mental health. That is very important for a person to stay focused. And the only way to do that, only way a person's body is going to be healthy is if he's mentally. So you have something, even if you're in medical field, you have something called a balance. So everything has to be in certain balance. So one thing goes off, it has an effect on the other part. So if a person is physically not well, it might affect them spiritually. It might have an effect on the soul. If a person has physical issues, it's going to affect their brain also, and mental health. The problem with us is sometimes we find, if somebody has mental issues, we find that as a disgrace, or something bad. Or even nowadays, or even in some cultures, they have superstitions. That if somebody has mental health, it means, he has jadoo on him, or he's an evil person. So they have these types of belief. And Islam came to remove these beliefs from us. Now I'll give you an example, because it's so relevant in our time. There was a Muslim philosopher, and he was also a medical expert. They use his book even till today. He was in the 10th century. They use his books also. I was speaking to one of the doctors in New York, and he said one of the first books we learned is from Ibn Sina. In English they call him Abu Sina, but in Arabic, or his Arabic name is Ibn Sina. So he was a Muslim, and he was a thinker, he was a philosopher, you could call him a physician. So he did an experiment in that time. So this was a few hundred years back, or almost 1,000 years ago. He did an experiment. What did he do? He took 2 sheep. He took a sheep, he put it in a cage. And on the other side, he took another cage and he put 1 sheep in there. So he has 2 sheep. But next to the one sheep, he put another cage and he put a wolf in there. This experiment he did. So what happened was, after some times, he realized that the one sheep that was next to the wolf, he could see the wolf. He had an effect on its physical body, on his physical aspect of his body, meaning, and it died after some times. Why? Because he had this fear. Although he was in the cage, but he constantly had this fear. He was looking at the wolf. And the wolf that wasn't next to the sheep that wasn't next to the wolf, it was healthy, it was strong, and it still lived on. So he deduced something amazing from this. He said a person's person's thoughts, his mental thoughts, it has an effect on a person's body. So especially nowadays, we're just in the house, person is just sitting in front of the TV, and it has an effect on their mental health. So what does that do? It affects the person's physical health. And when there is this imbalance, then what happens? The person, he moves away from the perfect, so you have the middle path. And as I mentioned, as soon as a person goes off, it has an effect on all three. It has an effect on a person's spiritual well-being, a person's physical health, and right? So now these 10 days is very important that we focus, because if you look at, for example, the countries, one of the most or majority of the expenditure in countries is what? So sometimes you have either defense, so army, and some countries the number one expenditure or the expenses is healthcare. So even nowadays everything is closed. The malls will be closed, non-essential closed, but the hospitals are open because they think that's necessary. Why? Because it's necessary for a person's body. If you want to be healthy, if you want to live on, you have to keep the hospitals open. They can't close that because they understand that is. So if you look at the healthcare industry, it's billions of dollars. They spend so much money on it. Why? Because they understand the importance of preserving a person's health. But when it comes to preserving a person's spiritual health, then we neglect that. Right? We care so much that I shouldn't get sick. Like a person has small flu, he takes medication, he consults people, doctors, whatever it is. And nowadays you don't have to consult. You can just buy the medication over counter. So what I'm trying to say is we focus so much on our physical health that we forget about our spiritual health. So that's why some places, when they wanted to close the masjid, some people, they stood up. And they said, you want to keep the hospitals open? There's thousands of people in the hospital. So why can't you have 50, 60 people in a masjid? Now obviously every community is different, and there's laws and stuff, and we follow that. But I'm just giving an example. And some people, they'll go to the shopping centers, they'll go to the malls, they'll find that essential, but in masjid you have 30, 40 people and they'll have issues with that. Say, look, you're going against the law. But you were just in a shopping center, you were standing behind a person in line. So that didn't have effect on you? You couldn't catch the virus then? And only when you come to the masjid you have this fear? So that's why we neglect the importance of our soul. And some people, they come to me also, and a few brothers, they said we should close this masjid and tell the people to pay at home. So I said, inshallah, we'll see, we follow the guideline. And the same people who give the advice, they come and pray themselves. So if you really have an issue, just stay at home. Nobody's forcing you, or alhamdulillah, we try as much as we can. And alhamdulillah, this is one of the bounties of having such people, or even the board members, that we're thankful to them for keeping the masjid open, because that's where you feel the spiritual food, or that's where you gain the spiritual medication for our soul. Imagine if the masjid was just closed, we would be just at home, perhaps watching TV, whatever it is, listening to news, doing other stuff, or perhaps sleeping even. So, and there are other communities which I know, which are much smaller. They have maybe 10, 15 people for salah, but they close the masjid. Sometimes they have 5 people coming for salah, but they just close it because they need an excuse. And then they look for different fatwas, they look for this mufti said that, and that person said that we should close the masjid and it's haram and this is halal. Every community is different. And if it's possible to stay within the guidelines, and alhamdulillah, there are other communities which are huge communities. And in other states, like I know personally the other scholars in Virginia and Maryland, they have very strict laws there. But despite that, and there they can only gather 10 people or less. But despite that, they're still doing Jum'ahs, they still have Taraweeh, and they're still having Taraweeh, and obviously they have things in place. So alhamdulillah, it's good that we have masjid open and we can gather in the masjid, because this is where a person gets their spiritual food from and nutrition from. Like if the hospitals were closed, what would you do? People would have issues. So it's very important that we focus on our soul. We give importance to our soul also, just as we focus on our body. So inshallah, in this last 10 days, now I don't want to stretch it too long, because it's very important that we do personal ibadah also in the masjid, and we focus on ourselves. So some of the sicknesses of the hearts, and inshallah I'll share with you maybe not tomorrow, but maybe day after, or every few days. some of the sicknesses that we have in the heart and how we rectify them. Because when there is a problem with our body, then what do? We need to fix it quickly. If a person has a minor flu, what does he do? He starts taking it. If he has a headache, just one headache, and he can't tolerate it, what do? You look for Tylenol or perhaps other medication to rectify it. So we have problems with our soul. There are many major problems. We have enmity, we have hatred. You look at condition of our hearts, including myself. We have hatred for people. That why is this person here? Why is this person doing this? Why is this person successful? How come he bought this? Why does his kid go to this college? How did his child become this? How did this child get this degree? This is a small example. We have hatred for each other. So it's very important that we cleanse our soul, from other things, jealousy, hatred, malice. These things destroys a person, not only spiritually but even physically. There are many. Even there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that a person, when you have jealousy in your heart, just as the fire consumes the firewood, that's how it's going to consume your good deeds, and you won't even realize. A person won't even realize that how much effect it has. So it's very important that we focus on our soul also, just as we give so much importance to our body, especially the last few days we have. Just try to focus on that, inshallah. And if we, like today we recited a verse in the Quran. That one of the qualities of the people who will be given Jannah on the day of Qiyamah is that وَلَمَنْ انْتَصَرَ بَعْدَ ظُلْمِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِمْ مِنْ سَبِيلٍ إِنَّمَا السَّبِيلُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يَظْلِمُونَ النَّاسَ وَيَبْغُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ. So somebody wronged you, but when they came and they asked you forgiveness, then you forgive them. You overlook people's mistakes. Whatever they did, that's fine. Just overlook it. Sometimes it's a minor thing. So it's very important that we focus on our soul, and especially in this time when there's lockdown and some people are having in their houses for a month, and sometimes they lose their sanity. I'll just give you that example that Ibn Sina, he did that experiment, and he realized that when a person has fear and a person there's anxiety, then what happened? He destroys himself. So they sit in front of the television, this many people died. Somebody just had a natural death and they said, here, he died from this virus. Somebody has minor flu, here, he has this virus. So this is just fear. So if it's meant to be, then that's what the deen teaches us. In this time, we have to hold on to the deen, very powerful and strong. So inshallah, in the next few days, I'll share with you some more advices. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the ability.